my good friend Louise Mobile. And today we're going to just have a short discussion on the introduction on tragedy and contingency. Louise, yeah, so maybe you can lead us in and just tell us what is the definition of this, and yeah, maybe.
First, let me remember my manners, which
Uh,
I don't always do. We philosophers are so head in the clouds. Or should I rather say we people who try to be philosophers, because it's always a journey and it's never complete.
I love that. That's
Yes,
really great. Yeah.
yes. So um, I've decided to talk on to speak about contingency and tragedy, because contingency is normally a logical concept, and it refers to a statement that is neither necessary or impossible. In the everyday sense of the word, it is a concept that could have been different. And say, for example, I have this pink coffee mug. Now, there's no law that says that a mug has to be pink. I just so happens to be in quite a girly mood, and I have seen the movie Barbie, but my which is kind of okay, but it's a bit hyped, but good if you want to escape from logic from time to time. But what interests me is the fact that we normally think in philosophy or even in real life as things set according to laws. In modernity, or after modernity, particularly after Sir Isaac Newton's laws of thermodynamics, laws of gravity, and the like, we kind of uphold it as an absolute standard. And we tend to think this is what truth and and this is the ultimate standard of truth, and something is false if it cannot be absolutely proven. But contingency is very important with respect to a particular um, element. And this is something that's normally forgotten in the way we normally think about truth and life, and that is time. Old Father Time.
Wow. Okay. I love where this is going.
I've said that this mug could have been blue or black or striped like yours, but it's also possible, in fact, it's very likely that none of our mugs are going to exist forever. The way I go about this crockery, it's likely that its life is not going to be very long.
Yeah.
So, but we've all had a bad experience when you're reading philosophy and simply knock something off the table.
All of us, indeed. All of us would be philosophers.
I promise not to do it right now. But even this promise is something much more fragile than we think it is. Certainly, we're subject to the law of gravity and we have some control over it. But time makes us very vulnerable, and because we don't know what's going to happen.
Or what's going to happen next.
Exactly. We can plan, but we don't have ultimate control over life.
Yeah, and maybe that's a little bit of a lie that we in the West or in our modern or postmodern views think about life. Like, if we break it down, we think everything is proven and perfect, and we build on that. Do you think the academia, the high view that we have of universities, is a part of that? This idea that we have everything worked out.
Absolutely. Well, don't get me started on the crisis of the university, because that would be a different lecture altogether.
Okay, let's keep it then
But
maybe to that. Yeah.
let's keep it to the simple things in life, like logic
Mm.
and tragedy.
Ah.
But you're absolutely right. Our educational model
Mm.
is particularly focused on easily controllable truths. If you
Mm.
go and study engineering, for example, all that you learn is embedded in or subject to the laws of physics.
Mm.
You What you study is subject to laws that are easily controllable, which metals set out according to which heat. You measure things precisely. If you put something together, if you a process engineer, you know that.
Yeah,
Yes, you
I
get
think
the
that
idea.
I take the point, and I think it is beautifully just in that short
Yes.
example of engineering. So just bringing that back into the contingency.
Okay, but just something more about the university. Then we're going to get to
Yeah.
contingency proper. But if you study the medical sciences,
Mm.
you know that the human body is strange.
Mm. Oh wow, yeah.
It's very difficult to say to a person who gets the happy news that he or she is now cancer free, that it won't return in 5 years from now.
Mm.
So our own bodies makes us subject to contingency. And this is, you could say that from the hard physical sciences up to the humanities, you go from necessary truths, such as what you get in mathematics, 2 plus 2 equals 4. But then, of course, that is Euclidean mathematics, and our coders will know that things get a bit more complex, but that's something for a different lecture. But what I want to focus on is this whole scale of knowledge that we have. We start off with our hard knowledge, mathematics, engineering, the physical sciences. Then we go to the medical sciences, where the two kind of meet. I mean, think of a subject like psychiatry. It's very complex. But then you get to the humanities, and the humanities is par excellence your subject of contingency.
Oh wow,
If you
okay.
think of a poet like T.S. Eliot, who basically wrote about this thing, it is contingency allows us to be free because things can be different.
Oh wow.
For example, to get back to my Barbie mug, it allows you to choose things. That condition which exists in the world allows us to choose, but it also makes us very vulnerable. As I've said, the idea of static truth, which Nietzsche criticized as staticism, is the idea that you have great transcendental truths, which are absolutely solid and immutable. But in the 20th century, after following Nietzsche's death, you get the great thinker who thought about this rational subject and his relation to the world is, of course, Martin Heidegger. But to get back to your point, it's not that we in the West never had this knowledge. In fact, it is pretty much a modern problem.
Oh wow.
Because, as you know, our greatest knowledge, in my view, goes back to the Greeks. And the ultimate creative expression of contingency, and this is really the point of this conversation, is tragedy. Now, tragedy can basically be defined as well, this is my definition. If you want a stricter definition, I recommend somebody like A.C. Bradley.
Yeah, I love that we're talking about definitions because that gives me the proper
Yes.
handle.
Now, tragedy occurs when a rational subject, which is just a philosopher's way of saying the individual,
Okay.
sets himself against the world, the cosmological order, and in the case of somebody like Faust, also against God.
Mm.
We can have a conversation about contingency and God at a later stage.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
For the purpose of this conversation, the rational subject is the individual in his rational capacity. He sets himself against the world, and then he finds that the world is so complex and uncontrollable that it hits back. Let's use one of the most ancient examples, which is, of course, that PG or at least R-rated myth of Oedipus.
Ah, okay.
Now, Oedipus was born in Thebes, and shortly after his birth, there was this prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother and raise children with her. Now, you know that even in our postmodern times, that is unlikely to turn out well. I mean, that is saying something these days.
Indeed, yeah.
But this it was, of course, it was Corinth, and it was, in any case, the cities don't matter, but the story basically amounts to that, to the fact that in his birth city, Corinth, this prophecy was prophesied shortly after his birth, and it was so they did the thing which so they thought the only solution would be infanticide. They can't allow this to happen in Corinth. But then fate stepped in, and the servant who was given the order to kill Oedipus decided to he can't kill a child. And he heard that the king and queen of Thebes didn't have children. So he made sure that this child ended up in Thebes. And of course, the king and queen of Thebes were so grateful. But to have this child, and this was always hidden from him. He didn't know about this. And of course, back in Corinth, they thought that things were fine. But it so happened that Oedipus grew up and he went to consult the oracle at Delphi. And on the way, he met his father, and on a narrow road. Now, both of them were royal, and they were accustomed to people deferring to them. And neither one wanted to defer to the other. Wow. They got into the fight, and Oedipus killed his father.
So everything was kind of set in motion trying to.
And then Oedipus ended up at his original city, and he found there was a big problem. The famous monster, the Sphinx, cursed the city, and Oedipus killed it. and by answering a riddle. And well, most people know the story rather well. And he marries the queen, and he begets 4 children, which leads to a new cycle of tragedy. But I'm a bit more familiar with Renaissance tragedy, which I'm teaching at the moment. But if you think of Macbeth, King Lear, they always set themselves against fate. Fate is basically, you could say, and this that fate is kind of a literary or metaphysical expression of what we in logic or science would call contingency.
Oh, wow.
Kind of like a personification of it. Because it's basically those collection of circumstances over which you don't have control. We know that things don't work out for Macbeth, it didn't work out for Oedipus, and it doesn't always work out for us. So contingency and tragedy connect in the form of the vulnerability of the subject. That the world is not a logical place. Logic is very useful, but it doesn't contain it doesn't explain the ultimate character of the world. We cannot really make sense of things like mortality, unpredictability, and the like through logic or even through empirical science. All that we can do is to negotiate the world. And the Greeks, of course, believed that you can reconcile yourself to this feature by at least throwing a veil of sweetness through art to it.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, maybe I just find this so stimulating, and yeah, there's so much beauty, so much to think through. This really opens a lot for me to think about. One thing I think of just shortly, and I don't know if this will help the conversation, but where I practically see this is the value that we put on marriages. And so when you go to a wedding, or you decide to marry, what you basically say to that other person, I don't know, I don't have control over the world. I don't know where we'll be in 10 years from now. I might have died. You might have gone crazy. We don't know. But putting myself against this world, this chaos, even if I can, it's saying I promise that I will be there. I don't know where we will be at, but I will try and negotiate maybe terms, and saying I can't say what will happen, but I will be there with you there, which I think is such a beautiful sentiment. It's maybe part of this art and beauty.
You know, I've never really thought about it that way, Georg. Marriage is a way. It's as an institution. It is what I would call a kind of buffer against contingency. It is really, and this is one of the reasons why I believe in it, and it is one of the reasons why our postmodern condition makes life so frightening and lonely, because life is ultimately very hard. And marriage is a beautiful metaphor for an attempt to deal with contingency and human vulnerability. Because, as you said, we don't know what will happen. It is at least the attempt not to deal with it alone.
Wow, I love that. I'm aware of our short time, and this is just the first conversation, hopefully of many. But I kind of tying that up for us. Where do you? What are we to do with this information? Recognizing that there is this contingency, this we are left over to the unpredictability and uncontrollability of the world. and yet we are agents. We think ourselves very autonomous.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That is what the subject, the rational subject, the Cartesian subject really is.
Mm,
It is ultimately the ultimate expression
mm,
of a non-contingent being. And as you said, this non-contingent being isn't as non-contingent as you thought. So, in I would basically sum it up or summarize it um, by saying that we, as the Greeks had tragedy or tragic myth to deal with contingency, all cultures deal with it in some or other mythological way. But I would say this is one of the mistakes that narrow defenders of the Enlightenment make, such as the new atheists,
mm.
that this is ultimately what faith, religious faith, is all about, is the ultimate attempt to deal with contingency.
Oh, okay, that is very interesting.
Because you spoke of marriage
Mm,
as one attempt.
mm.
Our institutions and our traditions are really attempts to deal with contingency, and this is why you can't just scrap it and start all over again.
Mm. So maybe at the far end of postmodernism, this deconstruction, that puts you in a very lonely position. A kind of yeah. I think trying to unpack this will take
Ages, yes.
ages. But I do love that that we've actually put something down to say that we need to understand that there is something like contingency,
Hmm.
and our reaction um, to that, maybe as a Christian,
Yes,
is understanding, but God is in control.
precisely, because that is another way of saying that marriage is one way of dealing with it, but accepting faith is another. This is why Søren Kierkegaard
Mm,
said that you have to take a leap of faith. It's all that you can do.
mm,
That is his response to contingency.
mm.
But faith is a different way of saying you don't have to deal with contingency alone.
Mm, mm. Wow. That for me is that is an apologetic in itself.
Yes, I think
Um,
so.
yeah, because it deals with this real world application, or real world challenges. Contingency it's a reality.
Yes.
And so, what are your ways to react? What is your options, to some extent, as far as you are aware of them? There is some capacity for us. We are aware. We are beings that's aware, and therefore we can actually see. Okay, I thought I had control, and I don't. That's one thing. Also for me, as you become an adult, the more you realize the world is more complex. And you also realize, okay, what I thought was going to be a simple route has had some contingency. We all experience that to some extent.
Absolutely,
Mm,
to a great extent, and this is the beauty of childhood,
mm,
is that you're not so subject to it. And this is why it's so important to protect children,
mm,
that a child should know that, okay, every Friday night we have dinner at grandma's. That is the way that habit is one of the ways of protecting us against contingency. But
mm,
the both the joy and the pain of growing up is to become aware of contingency, that the
mm,
world is more complex than you thought.
mm.
And there's something semi-sweet about that, don't you agree?
I do, yeah,
Hmm.
I do. Maybe again, maybe specifically because I am a Christian, so I do have peace.
Hmm.
Um, Even knowing that we are a speck in a universe of uncontrollable forces,
Hmm.
I have peace. yeah, knowing that my God is good and the creator of all things. So sorry,
Yes, 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 yes.
my primary um, education is theology. So I
Mm.
always come with a little bit of that when it comes to any philosophical unpacking.
Well, we can unpack the concept of contingency in a more theological sense at one stage,
Yeah.
but I would say this is where philosophy and uh, and the concept of contingency is where logic, theology, the arts, and the natural sciences meet.
Oh, well, yeah. That's. I think that makes it actually a major um, thing to consider, and why we started this as a first conversation. It's such a big
Hmm.
thing to ponder around, and yeah. So thank you for that.
Yes, just one final thought. This is why I'm skeptical about political revolutions.
Mm.
One of the great mistakes in the world is one particular example, which would be the Bolshevist revolution in 1917. And I think it is a problem that Marxism
Mm.
is not sensitive enough towards contingency
Mm.
because it takes only some factors into account. Not everything is material, not everything is economical, and you cannot guarantee that um, the the central concept of the social
Mm.
is very unpredictable,
Mm.
and that is why political revolutions seldom work out, and gradual change is much better because it allows you to have more of a grip on circumstance.
Mm. Well, Louise, now from my side, I want to call this Coffee with Louise.
Okay.
And for me, this could be something of I wish everybody could have coffees with Louise.
Oh, and I wish I
Um,
could have
yeah,
just as much of a privilege
well, thank you,
to have
Louise.
this conversation with you.
It's great to be
It
on
is.
your channel, but yeah,
Yes,
maybe I can just say
my
this.
privilege because this is what how philosophy started with Socrates. It's truth happens between people.
Mm.
There's and perhaps we can do an episode on Hans Georg Gadamer because he says that it's always a back and through movement.
Mm.
Yeah.
Louise, I think this is
Okay.
wonderful. I want to say this. I think the plan of this channel is long form
Yes.
discussions.
Mm.
And because we really need to think through, this is philosophy in its purest form, if we can attempt, if we
Mm.
can try that. And Louise, again, it's such a privilege to hear you talk and think through things and explain it. So I'm looking forward to more of this. And I
And
think
I look forward to having you here as a guest. Thank you, Gil.
yeah, and to the viewers who might see this, um, we hope to really engage you. Please, if you want to comment on this, and then we can open this discussion again for the future. Okay,
Thank you.
wonderful.
Goodbye.
Let's end it.
Okay.
So.